The Mobile Workforce Podcast. Industry insights, construction perspective.
Hello and welcome back to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are sitting down with Mr. Matt Smith and Dorrie Franzello Kurtz, who are both CPAs with YHB. We have a really nice conversation about being compliance ready all year long, and I think you'll really enjoy the conversation today. Let's give it a listen. Well, welcome, Matt and Dorrie, onto the podcast. Excited for the conversation today.
Thank you for having us.
Excited to be here.
I can tell. I feel it. I'm feeling the vibes. So here at Converge 24, you all just presented a session on a rather interesting topic about remaining in compliance all year versus last minute. Oh, got to hurry and get in compliance, right? So we have everything, cover our tails here. Tell us about that and why are you advocating for that?
Yeah, so I guess I'll step in there, Dorrie. So we come at this presentation with an interesting dynamic because I've spent my career primarily in the assurance space. So the year-end compliance work, audits, reviews, comps. Dorrie, on the other hand, comes at it from the consulting and advisory space and is the one that is kind of out there during the year and running into these issues and seeing the areas where improvement can be had.
And my background comes from being an internal accountant as well, kind of running accounting systems. So it's a unique perspective that the people, the users that are here have an accounting system, and it's really much designed to help them year round, not just to do an audit or a tax return at year end. So it's kind of getting the full value out of their investment. I
also think it's worth noting that, construction accounting is unique in that the users of the statements, it's not just banks or financial institutions. It's also bonding agents, surety underwriters. And these users need these statements throughout the year, not just at year end. So that whole concept of how do we advise our clients to be compliance ready year round, not just at year end.
Okay. And when you reference the construction circle, what does that mean and how does that come into play here?
Yeah, great question. So that's admittedly, I'll give CPAC a plug here. That's construction industry, CPAs and consultants.
Just had them on the podcast before you. So
Did you really? That was Kathleen Baldwin?
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, Kathleen is great.
It was fun. She's super skilled in that area.
She is. And of course, she came from industry as well. So comes with a very experienced background now as the executive director there. That's a presentation that I took over years ago from my mentor, Kevin Branner and Bob Beal with GBQ Partners. And it just really continues to resonate is that a lot of these construction firms, they think about going from estimating the contract, moving into the construction phase, information gets fed to accounting, and then accounting feeds information back to the wrap-up stage where you evaluate the job.
Yeah.
And that's a construction, that's a very linear communication cycle. And the thought is make it a circle and that all departments should be interacting and discussing all of these aspects with each other throughout the entire construction cycle in order to ensure that that project is successful. Estimating should be talking with accounting, not just construction. Construction should be talking during the wrap-up stage or feeding information back to estimating so that they can revise their estimates based on information they've learned from the history of those projects. So just speaking to kind of the interconnected communication and collaboration that needs to occur for the best-in-class contractors that we run into.
Yeah, and the idea of a wheel, I like that too, because there's always another project waiting to start. There's really no pause, right? Like you're not, okay, let's regroup everybody. We're going to start a new job next month.
Correct.
I mean, your hair's on fire. You're lucky to, take a bathroom break and grab some lunch, right?
And if you don't take that information, even if you're mid-cycle on a troubled project, there is so much information to pull out of that to feed back to estimating that's currently, to your point, bidding on new projects. Right. So that constant communication flow is critical.
And what was interesting is we did live polls during the presentation.
Okay.
Right. And so we're like, well, who gives you the most trouble with the communication? Right. And it's the construction. It's the people in the field that are doing the producing. And they don't necessarily, I don't think, see the impact that they have on the full cycle because they're not in the office. They're kind of removed from the cycle as far as like direct contact. So it was kind of enlightening. I mean, we know that because we deal with it every day, but to kind of see the people in the room respond to that was interesting.
Yeah, interesting to validate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, so in construction, we know obviously the contract schedule is a little unique from other industries. What can you tell us about that, and why is it important to deal with it uniquely?
Take this one.
So I think that we always talk about 4 components that go into that contract schedule, right? There's the contract with the customer and the amount that you're going to get paid, right? Then the estimating department has said, here's what we think we're going to spend on it, right? So that's pretty much the biggest
variable.
Exactly, right? It's the number that can change the most. And then there's 2 numbers like, what did you bill the customer? And what cost have you actually incurred and paid for? And those 4 things factor into that to kind of tell you where you're at in relation to revenue recognition and how the company is truly doing. Because when you receive cost from vendors isn't necessarily when you're going to bill and so forth, right? So we need to be able to use those components. But there's change orders that happen throughout the cycle. They're in the field. Sure, we'll add X, Y, Z to it, but it doesn't make it back again in that communication circle to the accounting department. So, the accounting department isn't aware that they need to be billed or that they need to be factored into that. And those calculations from that schedule go into the financial statements, which affect the bottom line, right? And so all of those things are kind of giving you the health of the company, kind of where things stand and so forth. So,
and we had a really neat tagline for that part of the presentation, kind of the demystification, right? I mean, the contract schedule is looked at as this like Herculean task at a lot of construction firms, right? When really, when you boil it down back to it's the 4 components, and 3 of them are accounting facts: cost to date, billings to date, and the contract value. Now, given there's a new standard, RevRec standard, that's been out for a couple of years, transaction price over contract value, completely understood. Let's leave that. That's a podcast for another day. But 3 of them are accounting facts. One of them is that big variable, which is the estimate, which creates a lot of the need for that, again, cross collaboration and communication. That was a big theme of today's presentation. So
interesting. Yeah. And the other thing too, that I think of, it's just like any investment. I mean, you don't want to be sitting on your cash too long either. You want to put it back to work. So you don't want to draw a pile of cash early and pay interest on it if you don't have a place to put it. Right. So the flow of that billing versus when you're making payments, and that process needs to have you don't want to be overdrawn. I mean, there's really a fine line. You want to try and balance that tightrope walk to make sure you're not over or under.
Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point as you talk about cash, right? Because again, with this industry, as you know, I mean, the old adage, cash is king. It's so critical. And without having sound internal, again, I'm stealing her fire from the CAS side, but sound internal process, policy, monthly close process. I mean, how do you know where your cash is at, right? I mean,
look, it's also interesting. Matt brought up a point today and discussed about job borrow, right? Okay. So a lot of times we try to overbill, and we overbill ahead of our profit, right? And so it's fine if the cash is in the bank, if the receivables are there. But if you're spending it and you're not aware of the impact of that, right? And so typically what happens, and we talked about this as well, a lot of companies fail in times of growth because they become over leveraged. They're spending money and they're looking at what they're aware of, right? The owners of the company, the project managers, what do I have to bill and who do I have to pay? But there's so many other aspects of that as far as the timing of all of those things happening as well that you have to kind of be cognizant of. And, again, if you're investing in the appropriate software and you have the users that can utilize it, then you should be able to get this information to provide management decisions on a timely basis. So,
and that was a neat kind of part of the presentation today, is we were able to pull some slides. Dorrie, we obviously have a ton of clients that are on the foundation platform. Yeah. And we were able to pull in some neat visuals and stuff to bring some of these things to life. That look, your program that this conference is based around. Right. You all have access to this. So given we probably were sitting in a room of obviously very talented, smart people. A lot of them probably are fully utilizing it. Yeah. But we just hoped there were a few that maybe had some of those takeaways of, I'm going to lean more into my system moving forward. I understand what they're saying. Yeah. They painted a different picture that maybe I've understood it before. And we discussed, what would we consider a win out of this presentation? And it was, leaning into your technology more after you hear this, pausing the next time that someone asks you for your internal statements. If you all pause and say, remember what Matt and Dorrie said? Once they see it, they can't unsee it. That's one of her famous sayings.
Exactly right.
Then it was a success today. So
that's cool. Yeah. So you mentioned a word I haven't really heard termed that way, and maybe it's just me. I was a general contractor for about a decade before I helped start this software company. So come from that world, but you call it job borrow. I mean, is that a PC way of saying robbing Peter to pay Paul?
Yes,
or
it's exactly what it is. Yeah.
I'm just making
I may have
sure.
actually said that even during the presentation.
That's the way we always said it, but I don't, so it's all kind of comes out the same in the wash, right?
But it's okay though, right? Because we discussed that also is that in this industry,
it's okay
right?
if you have the cash to cover it.
And if you're aware it's going
you're
on,
using
right?
your pool of cash that's allocated from different projects, but you got to be careful,
too.
right?
Retention is let's be honest. Sometimes it's a form of financing the project for the owner, for the GC. So it provides overbillings are great, right? It provides cash flow, but just being aware of what job borrow means, robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
So that you can monitor and make sure that it doesn't create a trap.
Yeah. That makes sense. So within those processes, both internally and externally, there are lots of moving parts. So what would you say external collaboration versus internal collaboration differences are between those two?
I think from internally, we look at what we're trying to achieve and looking at the entire team, right? So everybody has a role within an organization. So accounting has to get monthly financial reports out to management and so forth, but it involves other people in the team, whether it's project managers and so forth, or even individual transactions, for example. One of the things I think people struggle with, in a lot of the clients that I see is getting timesheets on Monday morning in order to process payroll, right? It's we have cutoffs internally to get payroll processed to make sure that the guys are getting their paychecks on time. But if we don't have the timesheets and we're struggling with that, it disrupts that process, right? But I don't think sometimes we explain that. We're just where the hell are the timesheets, right? And I think if it's guys, here's the process that's working on this, and everybody within an organization understands their role in, because, the flip side of that is the project managers, if my guys don't get paid, if their timesheets aren't correct, they're going to walk off the job. Right. And it's well, I would love to pay them, but we have to have the timesheets, right? But I think it's just having that open collaboration to all the people within a team makes the wheels go round, right? So,
and then from the external, first of all, I love hearing that you have a GC background, right? Because we're also speaking your language here.
Yeah.
But from the external perspective, what we hit on was just the regular meetings with the users of the financial statements, right? Whether that's management, investors, the shareholders, but then also your bonding agent, your surety underwriter, your banker, and your CPA, right? I think that a lot of times, contractors get comfortable when they're doing well and they have several years of just great history and profitability. And we all get caught in this, right? That some things fall by the wayside. Those regular meetings, keeping people up to date. Well, everything's going well. Everything's fine. We don't need to meet, right? But then when you come across that tough contract or that lost contract or that large job where you need to get it bonded, now you're trying to scrap to get everyone back in that communication loop in order to make sure that they are there, they are timely, and they can give the contractor what they need. So from the external collaboration and communication piece, it really the message was just regular meetings with your external users of those statements.
And I think it helps prevent surprises, right? A lot of times, if you wait till the end of the year to kind of make sure everything's buttoned up, you could have more income that you thought you would have or less income, right? And there's surprises I have to pay what? When do I need to pay it for from a tax perspective?
Yeah, tax planning perspective.
And so it's if we can have that information again throughout the year, because we're compliant, we're keeping it up, it makes it be a little bit proactive rather than reactive on the day that the tax return is done. They're due. The payments are due. So
establishing a powerful payroll tech stack just got easier thanks to Payroll for Construction, the construction-specific payroll service that seamlessly pairs with leading accounting software like Foundation, Sage, QuickBooks, and more. As you run payroll, automatically update your job costing and general ledger with labor data. Then, Payroll for Construction takes care of the payroll processing. Sync Payroll for Construction with your accounting software today.
Yeah, you could have invested in a pile of equipment that you needed because you knew you had excess instead you're paying it in tax, and you don't have the equipment to show for it either, right? So speaking of that, you're talking about that internal communication. Field employees don't necessarily know how to read, a balance sheet, nor do you want them to. There's certain data that the field needs and then data that the office needs. How do you collaborate, getting the field enough information and getting enough feedback from them while also translating it appropriately so that the back office people have what they need as well.
So I think it's a two-pronged approach. One, in relation to a contract schedule and jobs, like there needs to be a meeting between accounting and the project management, right? So it's a matter of making sure everybody understands, like, what does this job schedule mean? What are you being held accountable for as far as this is concerned? Let's discuss the estimate versus like the actual cost. But the other aspect of that is we talk to clients a lot about setting up processes on how to get timely information. You know, when do we need to have this document by or this process completed by and so forth in order to be able to pull those reports together for that report. And so it's important that once those processes and procedures are established, to communicate them through the entire company. Again, it goes back to that payroll conversation where it's like, if the project manager doesn't understand why not having timesheets is important and we're not just, you know, nagging, to, for lack of a better term, right? And so it's that open communication that brings it together so everybody is, you know,
accountable.
Aware. Exactly.
You're right, Dorrie, as you're sitting here talking about this and even the presentation earlier, accountability. And that's a piece that we even spoke with the audience about, was just that this concept of including project managers or superintendents into the financial information. So many contractors shy away from that.
Yeah.
We don't want to show them how much money we make on the job. Well, then how can you hold them accountable for the performance of the job?
How do they know what the goal is? What are they working towards other than a date? You know, you spend extra money to get done early.
Well, and that's a
not
very
better
valid
either.
point, right? Because people in the field understand what needs to happen, and it's usually date driven. We have to get out of here. We have to do this by these milestones, right? And so they understand what a process is. It's just looping them into that full process kind of helps as well. So.
Well, and you mentioned timesheets a few times, and truly that was the genesis of About Time Technologies and WorkMax, is getting that labor reporting in and knowing. And before you hit overtime, I can see we're approaching overtime, having daily visibility into labor and not waiting for timesheets. Heaven forbid, even after payroll, right? Like, I mean, you might as well just pay them salary if that's what you're going to do, because essentially you're cutting checks for money that you don't know really is due or not, right? It's
interesting because we talk a lot about, even in public accounting, right? Time, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at time after the fact, it's like, what is it? Baking cookies with a smoke alarm, right? They're done. They're more than that. You don't know until it kind of like is all.
Here, a fire truck. I think the cookies are
done.
But if we can see it as we're progressing and understand, that factors into the estimate. Are we over in our labor budget? And so many pieces of that, you know, and so it's that visualization, right? Yeah. It's kind of making sure everybody has the tools and the information to do their job to the best of their abilities.
And I actually love, you know, you mentioned another one of the products, you know, underneath the foundation umbrella. And I like that theme of this conference, which we spoke about several times throughout our presentation, is just tech, right? And tech is scary a lot of times, but there's so much power and benefit that can come out of it if people just lean into it and just understand it, lean into it, and you will see the positive outcome. But again, it is an industry where sometimes people are slow to change.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of industries.
Yeah. And then, you know, their better together approach it's really, you know, utopia for what people are looking for. It's like, how do I make 1 and 1 3? You know, if you got two great products that are, you know, maybe best of breed solutions, but they have a really nice integration, now you're really winning because you're saving in processing. You have extra visibility. You got one single source of truth where the data flow is going how you want. You got visibility instantaneously, or at least, if worst case, on demand, if not, you know, flowing in as it goes. And then with the cloud, obviously now, I would never go back to on-premise software. Now, it was really hard, even internally in our company. We were in an on-premise accounting package before. And it was painful to move to the cloud and to pay that subscription. And then pretty soon the subscription was more than what we paid for, you know, the whole system before. But that visibility on my cell phone to look at reports from the Bahamas if I wanted, right? Like, how do you put a value on that when, you know, you're running a real-time business?
We look at that sometimes, right? To say, like, we're always looking for capacity, right? The industry, as far as accounting finding people to do the work and so forth. Technology should eliminate some of that. It should actually, take away a fraction of somebody's, because there's efficiency gained in that. So that's part of it. And the other thing is, I gave a presentation once from a visual perspective, because I think it's important to point out, like, sometimes people are so hung up on that change. Yeah. And I presented a paper map. I'm like, we don't use paper maps anymore, right? And nobody even thinks about paper maps, right?
Yeah.
But
I remember Senior Beach Week using an atlas to make it to Myrtle Beach. I think that's the last time I ever opened a map, right?
But we don't think about where we came from when we're comfortable with something. But there was that hurdle to get over to become comfortable. But once you get there, you don't look back. You don't look back to, you said, like, you're now in the cloud, and it's like, why would we go anywhere else?
Yeah, and I think back, and I remember being in Canada, up in Ontario, we had printed maps on MapQuest. I mean, this is like 18, 20 years ago, like forever ago. And we had like this demo tour plan with like 6 different customers over a 3-day period. And so some were like 2 to 3 hour drive away. And one of them canceled or switched their time. And it was like, oh crap, I don't know how to get to there from here, because and it was just so weird that was a thing. Right. And so, but it does, it displays the point that, once you get your head around it and you actually realize the value and the benefit and the convenience of technology, you would never go anywhere without it if you can.
But if you think of like MapQuest, right? It says turn in 1.2 miles. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Right?
What is that?
Now I have somebody going, you make a U-turn,
make a U-turn. Yeah, this is the turn. This is the turn. This is the turn.
And it's funny, when I registered my account for this conference, it said, what's your tagline or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
And something that I always say is, change is the only constant.
Nice.
Change is inevitable. It's a matter of when you want to adopt change.
Nice.
And internally at our firm, we, at least with my department, I oversee the insurance department. I'm the insurance practice leader. Mm-hmm. I talk about the change curve, right? Where you have the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and then the laggers. And it's a matter of what side of the curve do you want to be on? Because if you're constantly on the lagger end, there's always a new technology, there's a new process, there's a new something that's going to come along. And do you always want to be behind? Right. And at some point, you have to get on the front foot and get off the back foot. So.
I got it. I thought you were going to say, if you ain't first, you're last. No. Just kidding.
Ricky Bobby. I got you.
I got you tagged on that one, but it's okay. It's okay, baby. No, that's funny. All right. So we talked about some of the red flags that are out there. Are there some other red flags that people could really get their eyes on a little early in some of this reporting that maybe isn't as commonly focused on? Or do you guys see anything where you're like, I wish more people would look at this or be aware of that, because this is a sign of something worse coming, maybe before it's, the wheels are falling off completely?
I think a lot of times what happens is people don't utilize the reporting and they don't know. Okay. So it's just the overall concept of, if you don't know, you don't know. And you think things are going well, but having the ability to make sure that the system or the reporting is providing that information then gives you the information to make informed decisions and be ahead, be proactive. A lot of times when we look at like compliance, whether it's, your audit or your review or your tax return, it's happening after year end, and it's like history at that point. It's like, let me tell you how you did. Well, I can't go back and change that. But if you have the information and if you're utilizing it, you can be more proactive and maybe change the results as they're occurring and not go, well, I had a feeling that was going to be that way. Yeah. Because there's a lot of feelings that, and you talk to a lot of people in construction, and I will tell you that they all have every single thing about their jobs, about their company in their heads. They know exactly where it is, and, they're right. But that's really hard to get on paper to present to third parties, right? Or to visualize. And when you kind of pull it all together, it can have a different outlook than maybe you thought. So
then I think from the financial management end too, it's just back to kind of the fundamental purpose and reason why, percentage of completion, which I know now that's under 606 called recognition of revenue over time. But the whole concept of revenue being recognized based off of your costs, I think is just something that once people grasp, we mentioned this in the presentation today, we always love when we see that light bulb go off with a client that we're working with that maybe doesn't understand it. And then finally they understand the concept, because you hear it all the time in this industry that, track the bank, and if I got cash in the bank, or
Right.
if I'm billing, then I know I'm good.
Yep.
Well, the whole premise of the construction accounting is it matches revenue with your cost that you're incurring, and to fully understand the analysis of that contract schedule. And to your question, the red flags and the analysis and the value of that is just, it's so critical in this industry. If you're dealing with fixed price contracts, right? We know that there's unit price guys out there, guys that are heavy in T&M, service contracts, but for those fixed price contracts, you have to understand that contract schedule.
Well, yeah, you've got, I mean, I have experiences in that too, where, right around 9/11, we started shipping plywood over to Iraq and other places and other materials. And so we had a shortage here, and the price went, I remember I was paying $5.50 for a sheet of 7/16 OSB. And within 90 days, it was $32 a sheet.
And interesting, right? Because you're mid-project.
And if you
don't have a price escalation
I had 38
clause,
projects going.
And if you don't have a price escalation clause in your contract,
and
you don't adjust your estimate of cost on that contract, and you just keep that estimate where it was, you really have no clue where your financials are landing at the end of the day.
No, where are you going to make that up?
Yep.
Well, and also like when you need a half a sheet and they cut it and they throw the other half away, it's a big difference than when it's $5. You know, I mean, not that you should do it, but that's what's happening.
Yeah, it's
the waste
all of a sudden
that are on the project.
Very big deal. Yeah, you can cut costs, you can complete the project quicker, or there's some ways you can squeeze blood out of that turnip, but there's only so many ways. And at a point, it's just this thing's underwater, right? So,
and to your point, even being on the front foot though, with knowing that it's going to be underwater, there are still proactive
mitigation measures.
Exactly, there's mitigation measures that can be taken that can be taken. So,
you're mid bid on other projects.
Exactly, I was just about to say that, right? Like people are estimating at $5 a sheet. Yep. And if we're not having those communications, no one's aware. I mean, I think estimating.
Even if it was a week late, or if they didn't get the memo, or
a week's expensive. If you have a bid that just went out.
Yeah, what is that communication loop, and how frequently is that happening?
And a lot of times with the job schedules, or like with the accounting, I would say it's like cookie cutter estimating. Like if we continue to do it and we've never analyzed it, we're making the same mistake because
exactly
we think it's working, but we don't know. And so, I mean, those are the things that kind of have impact if we can change those cycles.
Do you need construction-specific payroll services? Then you need Payroll for Construction, a complete payroll service designed to handle all the complexities of construction payroll, like certified payroll, union tracking, additional construction reporting, and more. You submit the time, Payroll for Construction does the rest.
Well, even worse if the project manager or the foreman learn, this takes about, and this takes about, and it may not really be what it takes. It's just what they're used to putting and used to making sure it comes in at that or less. It doesn't mean it. You could be, you might be 33% more efficient if you were really watching it, and you weren't pencil whipping, and you weren't taking this budget here and throwing it over there. And, we hear that even still all the time when I talk to companies, I got budget, you can bring it over here, or you can. It's like, what are you doing?
Similar to our industry. Maybe there's some of that going on.
You're
in the
literally disconnecting the wires of the job costing process that you've invested all this time, money, and effort into.
And it may work for that one job, but it might not work for the one that you're starting next week.
If it becomes the actual way that you roll and not the exception, right? It is now the rule. Then you really, that's pretty broken, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's critical.
So with that, I think, we've got communication issues and challenges. We've got software tools and technology. We talked about the cloud and that real-time expediency of data. We have back-end processes. Are there some common things that when you're in that room or when you're out meeting with clients that you seem like you run into more commonly than other words? Like, man, if these guys would just fix this one thing, they would be so much better off. Is there any one thing that stands out to you?
Yeah, I would say the appreciation for the accounting function in general, right? I always say that we can't make you money, but we can sure as hell keep you from losing it, right? Because we're giving you that information.
Sure.
And so I think when you're, in the contracting or construction industry, you're looking at my pieces of equipment make me money, you know, I'm, you know, putting all of these inputs into this as far as like the jobs are concerned. And those are, you know, tools that are working towards the contract, but there has to be the appreciation of the accounting function to kind of help, and that understanding, I think, of how important these things are.
Yeah, I guess my perspective would be just honestly back to the communication, right? I mean, the contractors that you see that are doing well, a lot of times they have very sound communication internally, and they're involving the field. And back to your point, you know, yeah, your laborers, maybe they don't necessarily get that financial information, but at least your project managers, your superintendents who are actually running those field teams, looping them into that financial feedback loop, so that they have all the information that they need to go make sure that they execute.
What are some, we've talked a lot about direct costs and things that you can track what about indirect costs, or what are common ones that you see people neglecting to be aware of, or at least just seem to, you know, miss in their analysis?
Like a lot of the contractors, especially like subcontractors, it's equipment cost, right?
Okay.
So it's not the yellow equipment, it's the trucks, the vans, like for the roofers, right? It's the fuel that they're putting on the jobs. It's the cost of like insurance is for the jobs and those sorts of things. Like when you're looking at it, it's very easy. I always say there's like the 5 elements: the labor, the equipment, the subcontractor, materials, and then other, right? So if those 5 things are pretty much, you know, what's my bonding cost going to be? They're very fixed or they're normal. But when you think of like, well, remember that truck that the superintendent or the PM is driving? Like, how are we factoring that into it? Because that's chipping away at your profit as well. You know, so those types of things I think are important to be cognizant of, but also like, how are you estimating versus how are you actually accounting for those costs? And there can be a disconnect. So if you don't have the indirect in your estimate, but you have these costs, well, we're already like chipping away at the gross profit. Or if we have them in the estimate, but we're not applying it to the job, it may look like we're under budget, but really we have this whole litany of costs that we're not accounting for properly. So.
Yeah, Dorrie hit the nail on the head. I think it's also worth noting with indirects that, I mean, if we had 40 contractors in the room, you'd probably have a hard time finding 2 contractors that do it the same. Yeah. And that's okay, right? But at the end of the day, it's a matter of understanding the impact of indirect costs, as Dorrie just went over, but then also being consistent and systematic in the way that you apply your method of allocating those indirect costs. So
yeah, I think you've highlighted a lot of very important areas, and I think people could pick any one and we'd be better off. But is there one area that you would say, you know, here's a good place to start? If a lot of this stuff that we've talked about is kind of a mess in a given company, or they just haven't gotten a handle on it, or they're so busy, they know they're making money. It's all coming out in the wash. I got money in the bank account and we seem to be rolling along here. I just don't want to mess with anything or don't have time. What's the first thing that you would recommend they do?
I mean, I guess I'll take that one first, Dorrie, but I guess the first thing that comes to my mind as you were saying that is, don't be afraid to align yourself with advisors that understand your industry. More than trying to figure it out internally. Yeah. It's overwhelming, right? And, you know, align yourself with a CPA firm that knows construction and engage them in this conversation and let them help you figure out and navigate that path. That would be my perspective, at least from my seat.
But I think even from just a general business, when I talk to clients, you know, I'm working with like roofers. Like, I'm terrified of heights. I promise you I'll never get on a roof. But that's what they do, right? Yeah. They're roofers. They understand the roofing industry. Well, I understand the accounting. So let's work together. You do the roofing. I can, you know, interpret the financial statements for you, make sure that you're getting the information.
And help train their team too, right?
Exactly.
Yes. It's not a matter of hiring a CPA to do it for you. It's a matter of helping train your internal team to make sure that they understand that value and can provide that to management. Sorry.
Because, you know, I call it like, you know, I know enough to be dangerous about what my contractors do, but I'm like, I couldn't go out there and bid something for them or come up with those estimates, right? But understanding and educating so that we have that, you know, appreciation for what we both do.
But then to answer your question, though, and not plug for construction CPAs at least, would be not just trusting your cash in the bank. That is one, again, back to that comment that we covered earlier. That's one thing that's commonly said. Well, if I got cash in the bank, I'm good. You can't falsely be, that's it's a blind way of leading and running a business.
Is that cash in the bank really your cash?
Correct.
Even though I don't know, maybe
back to job borrow.
Someone might think it's theirs, but
Correct.
maybe it's not. And they just didn't know it yet because some stuff was missed.
Yep.
Right?
It's a risky industry at the end of the day, and just acknowledging that, and again, surrounding yourself with advisors and a team that can help you, I think, is the most critical part.
Yeah, it's tricky. I know the one thing that I learned this later on in life. I wish I'd have known it when I started business, but I was an entrepreneur. I was a businessman that happened to be in the business of constructing things. First, nobody's a plumber. They're an entrepreneur. They're a businessman or businesswoman who happens to be in the plumbing business and provide plumbing services or, plumbing construction, mechanical construction. I mean, you're not a roofer. I mean, it is the trade that you've chosen to operate your business in. But I think a lot of the trades companies don't necessarily look at it that way. Mm-hmm. And it would be healthy for them to take a step back and realize, I need to run this a little bit more like, you could be doing widgets, donuts, hot dogs. Correct. It doesn't really matter what you're selling something for a number and for a value, and you're hopefully charging more than what it costs you to produce. Yep. And if you sell more of those and you're making a margin, you're going to make more money. Yep. It's really just the way that you break it down and look at it. So, definitely. So what about, we've got partnering with trusted advisors of all sorts, right?
Yep, all sorts, not just your CPA.
Coach, that team, that whatever it is that fills the gap that you can't do on your own. So that's great. What about you, Dorrie? Anything else you would add to that?
I can't think of anything. No, I think it's just also, again, looking at it throughout the year as well, right? So it's not, it's kind of being cognizant. And it was interesting when we were talking about this, right? Like, I understand because I've done, the assurance world as well, or even the tax world, like what needs to be done at year end. But it's like, from what I'm doing now, I can look at it to say, but it needs to happen in February. It needs to happen, every month of the year.
Should always be happening.
I guess back to the whole title of the presentation, right? I guess that's a great point, Dorrie. You kind of looped it right back to the presentation. Just being ready year round, not taking it and just thinking that it's one time a year where you have to get ready for your tax compliance or your review statement compliance, but actually realizing that it's a constant. Accounting is constant, right? Financial management is constant. It's not a point in time. It should never just stop.
Every game's a Super Bowl. Every project is a Super Bowl.
100%. Look, we run into that all the time where contractor has an outstanding year, but there's that one contract. Or they had a bad year, and it would have been outstanding if it wasn't for that one contract, right? Mm. But without timely, relevant, real-time data, how are you ever going to get to the point where you're able to be proactive and you're not just reactive once you've already entered that contract? So.
Track every dollar for each project with Foundation, America's #1 construction accounting software. Follow the progress of your jobs and track expenses with construction billings, WIP reporting, construction payroll features, and accurate job cost reports. Build profits with precision. Get Foundation today.
How do you get ahead of it?
You'll take more of those projects that are losers because you didn't know.
Correct.
And the other thing I'll submit, as we wrap things up, is back to the time and labor and production tracking that we do at WorkMax. I've also heard a lot of customers say, I was really surprised once we put that tool in the field and gave our team a better tool. The cream rose to the top, and a lot of times the guys that were studs, that were the people that were really their key personnel, weren't necessarily the same people that they thought. Yep. They're the most productive, or the ones that were truly diligent in their work.
Yep.
And so that's happening on your jobs too. You think you're good at these. You think you feel better about these, or the high profile projects, and we need these for visibility and for our reputation, and this is the kind of projects that we do, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but let's
it's
look at
also
data, right?
customers, right? Like
Yeah,
we
sure.
might think we want to work with
Yeah,
that customer,
sure.
but at the end of the day, we might
Yeah.
not make any money off of that customer,
Yeah.
right? Or it could be like a project manager. We think that project manager is running efficient jobs, but if we roll them all up together and look at it by person, estimators are the same way. You can make a lot of decisions by how you slice and dice information that you have that's reconciled and not necessarily after the fact as well.
But another great plug for the contract schedule, right? Because what better performance evaluation tool? We talk about it all the time. We advise our clients, add more columns to it. Add in who the contractor was, who was the owner, who was the lead estimator, who was the project manager.
Key data points, KPIs.
KPIs that then, to Dorrie's point, you can slice and dice that contract schedule. Anytime that we get approached by a client that says, hey, you have any feedback on a bonus program for my guys? Yeah, tie it back to the contract schedule.
Yeah.
Job performance. Be able to slice and dice it. To Dorrie's point, understand if you're working with a customer that isn't profitable, but you think that they're a great customer. So many ways to slice and dice that schedule to get great data points out of it.
Yeah.
We talked today about like taking that job schedule and then tying it into your financial statement, because now you're saying it reconciles to my income statement and the money that I'm making, but who's making the money, who's making the most money, who's doing the most profitable jobs, who's managed, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like what's contributing to the bottom line, what's covering my overhead and those sorts of things as well.
Yeah, the one other thing that this dovetails right into this, we did a podcast with one of our customers, a bit large electrical last night here at the event, and they talked about their estimating. They happen to be using McCormick, one of Foundation's estimating systems, and they said once they got that dialed in and they started to realize, this company really never gives us any work, or this one, we're always low on this, our margins are bad, and it's always for this one contractor. And so they're getting data points and feedback that they didn't realize before, because the spreadsheet and the old way of doing things just was not giving them visibility. Yep. And so it's like, let's just quit bidding their stuff. Number one, we're losing money if we win it. Number two, it's hard to even win them. Let's go find new water to fish in, right?
Data-driven decisions, right? Period.
Yeah.
Right. And yes, maybe you could still hand jam a spreadsheet and have that data, but think about the time that it takes to do that versus leaning into technology and having a platform that provides that to you and feeds that to you versus having to pull it out of a spreadsheet. It can be pushed to you from some of these more tech forward products.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
using a GPS versus a map, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. That's great.
Correct.
Yeah. I love it. Well, I think, from my angle, and I'll let you all wrap up with your final thought, but it just feels to me like sometimes and I'm in the we also, sometimes we get emotionally attached to a result or an outcome or a situation where we feel comfortable because we like it, we're used to it, whatever it is, there's some reason we're drawn to that, and it's not always in our best interest. So let's get emotionally attached to better data results and to the things that look better when you track them accurately, and it's profitability, right? It's efficiency. Those are success indicators that I think we need to work and fight to get to versus, hand jam a spreadsheet, like you said.
But I also think that there's patience there, right? Because a lot of times when people utilize something different, it doesn't always work the first time. Oh, it doesn't work. It's like,
That's a good
you
point.
got to try it again. You got to get, lean into it and not just say, because it's not what I'm used to looking at or used to doing. I think I read a survey once, it takes 66 times for something to become a habit, right? So you can't just go in and do it once and go, it's not working.
That's why working out never sticks with me.
Interesting.
I can make it through 2 months.
Yeah.
And when you look at implementing something new or looking at something new, it's new. It's that change management. It's kind of saying it's going to take a while for this to become my norm because it's not what I'm used to looking at as well. So it's just giving that, birth for something to become the change. So
That's good. How about you?
Closing? I guess closing comment for me is just lean into tech, right? The world is moving fast, and this industry moves fast. And, the more you lean into tech, the more you accept change, and the more that you lean into your advisors to help you through that, I think the more successful our contractors could be. Also, goes without saying that we really appreciate this opportunity with Foundation. And appreciate the opportunity to be here in Nashville.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a lot of fun, Matt and Dorrie, getting to know you both and have a fun discussion. So appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us for the Mobile Workforce Podcast by Foundation Software. To hear more episodes, visit us at workmax.com/Mobile Workforce Podcast or subscribe to the Mobile Workforce Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. And if you like the show, be sure to leave a 5-star review, share with your colleagues, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Mobile Workforce Podcast.